Hello everybody, this is Nicola Halliday from the Clear Company. Welcome to our webinar. This is the second in our series of webinars exclusively for Clear Assured users. I'm going to quickly hand you over now to Jon Manning from Arthur Ellis Mental Health Support. Today we're focusing on the sorts of things that people can think about in terms of the initiatives that they might have within their business that can support people with mental health issues, and also take a look at how your management style can also work to the advantage in terms of helping colleagues. So I'll now hand you over to Jon.
Thank you, Nicola. Hello, everyone. My name is Jon Manning. Like Nicola said, I'm the founder of Arthur Ellis Mental Health Support. We are a training and support company, so we offer training to managers within businesses, whether it's a non-profit business or whether it's a private company. So we support different schools, charitable organisations, so that they can deal with their communities in a slightly different way. And we're working with businesses across the country so that their managers are able to use our tools that we've developed. So I'll talk to you through a little bit about our tools, but primarily today what I want to cover is a little bit about us, because probably haven't heard of us before, I can imagine, and also a little bit about myself, why I've started the business, and then we'll get into some little tips and tricks around looking at what initiatives that you might have in place already, whether they're going to work long term, and if you are looking at implementing anything, whether it's actually going to work for your business over a longer period of time. So thank you very much for the Clear Company as well. It's been really lovely to have me on here. I know that it's something that they're really passionate about, including within their offering, adding value to their users. So thank you very much to you guys as well. So we are from Arthur Ellis. My name isn't Arthur. I get that all the time. My name is Jon. So there's a little bit of confusion there sometimes, but I started the company and I named it after my grandfathers, so Arthur and Ellis. Ellis was had a diagnosis of something called schizoaffective disorder, and that is quite a tricky mental illness because it's a combination of schizophrenia and bipolar. So I found out more about my grandfather as I got older, and learned about the different struggles that he had, and when I learned a lot more about myself, I wanted to set up the company in my grandfather's honour, basically. So as you can imagine, early 70s, West Yorkshire, Ellis's behaviour was not taken too well, so he actually ended up, unfortunately, spending the majority of his life in a mental health hospital. So understanding all of this has really given me the drive to try and not necessarily just provide services, but to provide services that are actually going to make a difference to individuals' lives. So that's why we're called Arthur Ellis. We've been around for about, this is our 13th month of trading, so a relatively small new business. And the last 13 months or so have been pretty incredible. So I'll go through a little bit about what we've been up to as well. So today, really what I want you to get thinking about is whether your initiatives are working long term. And the only way I think that we can do that is by exploring mental health, what sort of impact it's having on businesses in general, what impact it's having on people, and what healthcare is offering in order to support these individuals. So not necessarily just looking at facts and figures, but what is the future of healthcare going to look like, and what does accessing these services look like over a longer period of time, and also to help you guys understand what process somebody goes through when they are referred or signposted, so that we can see, actually, if we are signposting people, is this going to be effective the way that we're working in the background with them? How do we keep them supported? How do we keep them active throughout this period of time? And then we're going to be going through a little bit of example around what our training is based on, and what a shift in management style can do to help prevent these issues in the first place, but also if somebody does have a long-term condition or they're returning to work, how can you manage someone in such a way that supports that recovery and prevents them from relapsing or getting unwell again? So throughout the webinar, welcome questions. There is a little section on the sidebar that you can pop any questions in. We will have some time at the end to cover those off. So if you do have any questions as we go through, feel free to just pop those in there, and then I'll revisit them at the end to hopefully answer any questions. Or if I don't know, I can go away, find out, and get back to you. So who am I? You don't necessarily know who I am, I imagine. I am the founder of managing director of Arthur Ellis. But prior to that, I did work within recruitment to begin with. I worked in both contingency, and then I set up executive search divisions over a period of about 9 years, managing teams and divisions of up to about 1.2 million. So had quite a successful career in recruitment, and it was mainly in the rail industry. So my experience is primarily looking at things from a commercial standpoint, not necessarily from a mental health clinical standpoint, but that commercial thing of actually creating something for businesses that's gonna work and be effective. So I was then taken on by a railway client of mine to work as commercial management consultant for a variety of railway franchise bids. So those bids would be sort of a bidding process of about 18 months, and worked on or managed bids of up to about 1.6 billion. So relatively complex, quite large scale pieces of work. But there was quite a lot of different things that were going on in the background for me, because as is with everybody, we have a professional life and a personal life. So I really wanted to outline, despite doing all of these things, relatively high profile positions and relatively serious, very critical positions, I had a variety of things going on in the background. So who I am really is somebody who spent 70% of my life in the mental health services. My first hospital visit was when I was around 6 years old for my mental health. And then throughout the next sort of 20 years, I was in and out of different services, visiting my doctors, sort of approaching different issues as I grew up. And I was diagnosed with a variety of things. When I was 18, I spent some time in a hospital again. Unfortunately, after an attempt, I was in a waiting list at the time to get some help, but waiting lists can sometimes take a little bit of time and have quite an impact. So I was finally, a couple of years ago, diagnosed with something called bipolar disorder, and aspects of that and elements of that are hereditary. So that's where the connection with Ellis came from, and that's when I started learning a lot about him, learning about his life and the different struggles that he came up against. And I went to quite a few different mental health training days, training programs, so that I could work with my manager at the time to help them understand how we can work with this, how can we work in such a way that isn't going to get me unwell again, isn't going to have a negative impact on me, and help me and assist me with managing this condition. And there wasn't anything out there. I couldn't find anything apart from things that would signpost me and things that would guide me towards my doctors. But as you can see, I've been under the care of doctors for a very long time, but it was making sure that people at work understood that and understood how they can best support me. So that's why when setting up Arthur Ellis, looking at different ways in which we could train managers to deal with this, I got together with a variety of healthcare professionals, from psychologists, GPs, psychotherapists, to really start creating something that would be effective long term and make sure that people were supported and not going to work in such a way that's just going to get them unwell again and sign them off again, and so they're more effective in work. So we'll go through why and what sort of stats that can support. With the purpose and focus of Arthur Ellis, despite these things that typically you would see as something that's going to hold somebody back, providing that purpose and focus and really having the drive to make positive change within this area, positive change from what I lived through to being able to actually start training people in how to solve those problems. Over the last 13 months or so, we've been lucky enough to be finalists and win a variety of awards. Business in the Community was a massive one, and when we were able to get the mentorship of some fantastic people, so like the directors of Bupa, for example, directors of Santander and Anglian Water, to help us start looking at things from a business perspective, but also looking at things from a clinical, medical perspective to ensure that everything that we're training in is evidence-based, it's going to be effective, it works, and the awards that we've won are a mixture of different local awards, because we're based in Milton Keynes, and national awards as well. So coming up in December, we've been nominated for National Entrepreneur of the Year and National Best New Business. So really excited for December, but that is just to show that whether you have any what's known as illnesses or any things that are typically seen as holdbacks, or whether anyone in your team has got a condition, as long as you work with it long term in the right way, in an effective way, you can get an awful lot out of your people. So I have a question, and there's going to be a couple of polls within this webinar. So I want to initially just ask people, and I'll launch this poll here. So have you or anyone that you know ever been affected by mental health? I just would like you to vote on that, and I'll give you a couple of seconds just to give that a go. Okay, has everyone voted? Lovely. So I don't know if anybody can see the responses, but so far we have 100% yes. It's a massive issue. Mental health affects absolutely everyone. And I think quite often mental health is seen as something that's just affecting the individual, but it's not always the case. The family can be affected, partners can be affected. It kind of has a ripple effect into a variety of people in your life supporting you. And not to say that that's a bad thing. I don't want to make it sound like it's a burden or anything like that, even though sometimes from the person experiencing these issues, it can seem that way. But it just shows that the responsibility to be able to support someone goes further than just relying on clinicians, relying on people who are from a clinical background. And that's sort of the area that I think that we want to address. And by looking at our training and our offerings, being able to have an impact to the wider people supporting it, not necessarily just providing tools to the individuals. It's about equipping everyone with the ability to address something. If someone says they have a diagnosis, if someone says they have something that they're dealing with, whether it's situational, whether it is an enduring long-term illness, then immediately we know what to do. Immediately we know how to support that person. And that's really the area that we want to focus on. So, I'm not alone, and as we've got 100% yes back on that particular poll, we are all not alone within this. So from, if you're looking at building a business case initially for putting in some initiatives, there are some different things that you can take note of, and this will be recorded and sent out, so you don't necessarily have to scribble all of these down. But if you look at employment as a whole, not necessarily just within your business, even though it does filter down to have similar figures, 70% of a workforce, 70% of employees have experienced poor mental health at some point in their career. That means that at some point in the career of graduates coming through, new employees joining the business, at some point they are more than likely going to be experiencing poor mental health at some point in their lives, in their work lives. At any given time, though, in any business, there's 1 in 6 employees suffering from a mental health condition. So that's a diagnosed issue that they know about. That's around 16.7% of people who are currently in the business that are dealing with a particular condition, dealing with a particular situation. Despite that figure being quite high, 16.7%, only 3% of adults are able to receive psychological therapy. Only 3% of them get psychological support. And that's because 75% of people with those issues might not be able to actually gain access to it. So it's not necessarily that they don't want it, it's that the services are so stretched, there's so many funding issues and a variety of different things that it's just unobtainable, unfortunately. So what does that mean to businesses? So from a commercial standpoint, which is the sort of stance that I typically take, it costs per employee, and this is per employee, this is not across just people that have a diagnosis, this is everyone employed within the country. If you look at the private economic impact of mental health to private businesses, it costs £1,304 per employee within your business. So, for example, if you take, and this would be interesting to know if you have the ability to quickly work that out and pop it into your questions, it would be interesting to understand what sort of size businesses you work for. And if you basically times the amount of employees that you have within the company by 1,304, you can kind of get an idea, a rough idea, not exact, but a rough idea of how much commercial impact mental health is having to your business currently. Quite a lot of the time, it's seen that people being signed off is the worst possible thing. But actually, dealing with a mental health issue and not having that purpose and focus and working in such a way that's keeping you well, like I mentioned before, at work, it can actually have twice as much of an impact as that person just being signed off or being absent, because of the reduction in productivity, silly small mistakes that can be made, or lower quality of work can have twice as much impact. So by working with people and keeping them active in work can have a much, much better impact to whatever initiatives you might be looking at doing. So because of this, or because of the reduction in productivity, only around 40% of employees are working at peak performance. Now that's a mental health fact. That's not necessarily from an efficiency point of view or anything like that, but because of the mental health, because of mental health issues that are present day to day, only around 40% of employees are working at peak performance. So addressing this in work, there is a massive room for improvement there to be able to support these people and actually get those figures up really quickly and really easily. So the impact that that's having, so a couple of years ago, and nowadays I can imagine that everyone sees mental health everywhere. Most days there's something in the news about it, and it's really, really good. But about 10 years ago, that's when awareness really started happening and kicking in. So all of these awareness campaigns obviously cost a lot of money. And unfortunately, typically, money has been drawn out of the services from the government standpoint to fuel these awareness campaigns. So there's been a massive rise in awareness, but there's been a reduction in the services offering support. And that's why that 3% of adults being able to gain these services is so low. So just to give you a bit of an idea, in the last 2 or 3 years, referrals from GPs have gone up by around 300%. So I'd like you to think, if your business had 300% more clients, yeah, sounds great, but would you actually be able to deal with that? Would you have the capacity to be able to deal with that? So that's why the impact from this shift in this change of people becoming more aware, the stigma slowly breaking down around it, is actually having a bigger impact to the economy and bigger impact to businesses, because we're kind of struggling now to cope with the amount of people seeking help. So I'd like to put that to a vote, and I'd be really interested in hearing your guys' view on this. So I'm going to open another poll, and this particular poll is asking you whether you have found it harder to get a GP appointment in the last year or so. Can you see it becoming a little bit more difficult or taking a little bit longer to actually see your GP? So I'll give you just a couple of minutes to do that, or a couple of 30 seconds or so. Have you found it harder to get a GP appointment? Lovely stuff. Thank you very much. So 64% of you have said yes, that you started to recognise that it's getting a bit more difficult to access a GP, which I certainly have noticed that. It varies, I think, from where you are, from where you're located. But if you, I don't know if anyone has seen the recent reports from the NHS, but over the next year or so, the population of GPs in the country is going to reduce by around about 1,000 GPs. Now, that is doesn't sound like a big number, but the impact that has means that between 250 and 350 surgeries are going to close this year, GP surgeries. And that's because there purely isn't enough GPs to populate them, which displaces, if you look at the patient population that covers, the patient population to the other GP surgeries surrounding those is going to increase to be able to absorb the patients that are currently going to the surgeries that are going to close. So that patient population is around about 1 million patients if you're looking at 350 GP surgeries. So with that in mind, why are we signposting people, or why are we purely reliant on sort of signposting people? And that's why I think that, or that's what, by speaking to a variety of businesses and being in the role that I am, it's ineffective training that I think is the issue. So we've got that increase in referrals that I've mentioned, the reduction in resources from being able to actually cope with these issues. That's all by decreasing funding. But I think that moving forward and being able to support people in a different way so they can actually access this, we need to start training people to understand how to actively support someone ourselves. Not necessarily from a clinical standpoint, but how can we effectively work in a way that stops someone getting unwell in the first place? So I think ineffective is probably a little bit brutal, because I think that mental health training as a whole is very effective, really good. But that's what I want you to start considering, is that if we are signposting people, is it going to be an effective way, or is it the sole way that we can support people, or do we have something else in place for that meantime or for that period in between? So what I wanted to cover as well, just to help and develop that understanding of what happens to an individual after we signpost, I wanted to go through what, and this is from different sources. So these figures are from the Royal College of Psychiatry. They did a recent report on how long people are waiting to access services after visiting a GP. So that really varies. So after we send somebody to our GP, or we suggest that they get some professional help, GP is typically the option that they go for. You can now self-refer to certain services. So if you Google local self-referral unit, then it will show you where your local one is, and they usually have an online form that you can fill out. But typically GP is the first point of call that people tend to go to, which is completely accurate, completely right. So if there is that therapeutic support needed, rather than just providing some antidepressants or anything like that, that referral has been recorded by the Royal College of Psychiatry to between 4 weeks and 13 years. There has been some instances where people have been waiting that long for the referral to go through and for them to access an appointment. 4 weeks is the NHS's target for people who are suffering with something quite severe like psychosis. So they have a particular target to see those people within 4 weeks. But the range and the amount of time that can take varies on location, it varies on how many people are in a waiting list. So it really does change. So from signposting our people within our business into to get professional help, that is something that we need to be aware of, that it's not necessarily just we've signposted, we've done our job, great. There is a whole follow-on piece there that people are going to need support in. And understandably, during this time, during that kind of 4 week plus period, 75% of people deteriorate. So understandably, you go to seek help and you're kind of just waiting for it and you don't get an idea really of how long that's going to take. So people's conditions typically do deteriorate in that time. Once therapeutic intervention or that appointment is obtained, to really start creating behavioural change in the way that we think, the way that we react to things, that is a process of that things like CBT cover, things like different therapeutic interventions cover like that. CBT is cognitive behavioural therapy, if you're not too sure. And that process of changing someone's mindset, changing the way that they think about and react to certain different situations, that process can take 12 to 18 months of work. And usually somebody will get homework from that. It kind of sounds a little bit strange and a little bit like sort of back to school kind of thing. But having these appointments and addressing the way that you're thinking about things, typically you're given things to go away, be mindful of during the day so that you can address the way that you think and start making that change about how you're reacting to things. So that whole process of embedding that into and making that change can take between 12 and 18 months. So the psychologists that I work with are going to absolutely hate me for this, but I like to keep things extremely simple, and I wanted to go through what a therapeutic process looks like, or what a mental health nurse or psychologist or mental health practitioner in general will typically look at focusing on someone when sort of throughout this process. So if we think about those 3% of adults who are able to access this is what they will be going through. So a mental health practitioner will help you to understand your condition. They'll go through what keeps you well, what sort of lifestyle things will you need to maintain and be consistent with in order to not relapse or not get unwell again. And then they'll help you to provide a routine and a focus around this. And this might be areas of homework as well that you sort of take away and go and do. And then they will then focus on that behavioural change piece, that 12 to 18 month piece of work, which is really focusing on your thoughts, how to adapt those to be more healthy, what sort of negative coping strategies you've adopted. So quite a lot of the time during that period of waiting or suffering with a condition, people turn towards things that aren't necessarily helpful or healthy, like drinking, smoking, drugs. It happens an awful lot. It's something that people rely on, and that's why being able to halt that and stop that before it takes hold is really, really important. So this is what a clinician, a mental health practitioner would do, typically with someone over a period of time, if and when they're able to access this support. Now, like I said, Only 3% of adults are able to access this. Only 3% of people. So what we are suggesting, and what's something that we've been working on and we're being able to do really well at, is by helping organisations and people in general to take on the bits that with minimal training you're more than capable of doing, that you don't necessarily need a degree for, you don't need that clinical understanding, and that's this bit. And that is understanding. If someone has a condition, gaining insight into that condition and understanding what keeps them well, and provide them with that routine and that focus around it, building that into the way that you manage that individual can be really, really important for that period of time that they might be waiting for support, or if they come back from support, to make sure that they don't need support again and it prevents them from getting unwell again. Building this into the way that you work with your people can prevent mental health issues from having the impact that we had a look at earlier on. And this is what our training focuses on, but this is something that you can have a look into how you're doing it within your business, whether it is included within any initiatives that you're looking at, or whether you think that it might be worthwhile taking a look into how to do this. So what was the primary focus around this is there is a clinical model about how people are made up. So if you're looking at somebody quite holistically, it's really helpful to have an understanding of the physical side, the mental side, and the social side, and how they interact with each other. So this isn't too clinical. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because it does sound quite scary. But from a management perspective, if we're looking at being responsible for people, having that understanding of how that person is made up, how they work, and how conditions can be supported is really important. And if you have a look at how the physical, mental, and social states of people interact with each other, it could be really helpful from a management perspective. So if we have a look at this, and for example, if somebody has a physical disability, if they've got the area of their whole life is affected by a physical disability. So if you look at the physical circle and then it's linked with the social and mental states, if someone's got a physical disability, their social environment and their mental state will change. If someone is socially isolated, as an example, their physical well-being will be hindered by that, and their mental state will be affected. If someone has a mental health condition, whether it's something that is situational because of something that's happening at home, or whether it is something that's long-term that they've been diagnosed with, then in order to keep them well, you need to focus and help them. The best way to support them is to support the physical and social aspects of their life, which will in turn have a knock-on effect to improve and maintain their mental health. So by understanding this kind of model and how different things interact with each other, we know and we can see where we can focus support on different individuals within the business or within our team. So if someone discloses they've got a mental health condition, if we're looking back at what we can do to support them, we can understand what's going to keep them well physically and what's going to maintain their social environment or help them to have a positive social team around them. So we can have a look at different initiatives within the business at different times of the year. So if that person begins to dip, it might be a case that you change the way that they conduct their meetings, so that it's outside having a walk, or it's at a coffee shop, things that are slightly more social. So it doesn't need to be a massive change, or it doesn't need to be a clinical thing. But from a management perspective, these small things will prevent and have been proven to prevent the way in which that person operates, feels, it releases endorphins, it keeps that person well, and it provides them with that routine, that focus around these things that are healthy for them. It keeps them well within the business. So if you're looking at the performance increases, increasing that performance from 40%, it could be really effective for that, because you're releasing those endorphins while at work by working in such a way that is promoting their recovery and the management of their illness if they do have one. So what I wanted to cover as well is sort of how to do that. There are quite a lot of different issues related to the practicalities of certain things, and I want to make sure that you leave with some actual practical, useful tools. So one thing that sort of we've been able to create is a bit of a 3-step process around this, because it's all right and well and good saying, yeah, understand your teams, understand what keeps them well, but okay, how do I do that? How do I have that conversation? So looking at a shift in management style, looking at how to start addressing it with your managers and having that conversation and those different conversations, there are a few different things and different tips and tricks that you can do. One of those is having a look into active listening, encouraging your managers to be able to really start listening to what's going on with that employee. So asking, and you're more than entitled to ask questions of what's been going on lately. If you see that someone is slightly off within the business, understanding why, understanding what's been going on, and active listening techniques as soft skills to start having those conversations is a really good place to start. If there is a situation where an employee discloses a condition or discloses that they have been struggling with something, understanding how that or what sort of impact that has on them. And by impact, we mean what has been affected in the back of your mind by those physical aspects, by the social aspects. So typically, a lot of people within our teams or within our business will have a variety of interests. Some of those fall into the physical category, so exercise, activities outside, things that they enjoy doing which keeps them well. It might just be walking. It could be, it could be a variety of things at different scales. And from a social aspect, if we're looking at keeping people social, which have a knock-on impact to maintaining their health and their mental health, we can understand what impact their condition has on their social side. So if they do begin getting unwell, or if they do start recognizing that they're really stressed out or anything like that, what areas drop off first? So for me, for example, with my condition, if I'm starting to get a little bit under the weather with it, or it's starting to have a bit of an impact on me because things are really busy, or I'm not necessarily managing things correctly, my exercise and my communication with friends, family drop off immediately. So they're the two things that are my signs that I'm not coping too well. I've communicated this with my team. They highlight it to me. I'm more than happy for them to highlight it to me because they know how to do it and they know to do it how to do it with me. So by addressing this early on and knowing those signs within your team and for that person's situation can help you to not necessarily just know if they are becoming unwell or struggling with things, but it allows you to provide that routine and that focus back on those things so that you can prevent them from dipping to such a point that they need to get signed off or they're being ineffective in work. So by going through and gaining insight into a condition, why someone was signed off, what happened, but by understanding not necessarily why you were signed off and what issues created that particular period of time from a work standpoint, whether it's somebody at work that's particularly abrasive or a situation where they had way too much work on and just didn't manage it. by understanding what dropped off for them in their physical side and in their social side, you can then monitor that and ensure that it doesn't happen again. So I hope that makes sense in a practical way to start doing that and to start building it into your management style. But a lot of the time we focus on what was it that made you unwell, or what was it that got you signed off? What sort of circumstances was it? Was it out at work? Was it in your personal life? Was it something to do with a partner? Was it at work? But by understanding in that physical and social side, what started dropping off? What started having, what did it start having an effect on? Because someone might be really passionate about cycling, for example. And if these things are going on, and we probably recognize it within ourselves, if we get really, really busy, that's the stuff that starts dropping off. And from a business, what we can do, going back to that particular process of monitoring these things and being able to provide that input and support someone throughout recovery or stopping them from relapsing, by understanding these things instead and what is important to that person to maintain, we can provide that routine and focus, and we can ensure that they don't reach burnout again. We don't that we have something to monitor, so that we know from a mental health standpoint how effective are they being while they're at work, because we had a look at them actually being it's twice as costly to businesses, or has twice the impact if people are at work and not managing these things and not being able to cope. So often people won't speak up in work, but by understanding this within our teams, without people sort of needing to reach out, because there is that stigma attached to it still slightly, without needing people to reach out actively themselves, as managers or as people who are looking at initiatives, we can start encouraging our managers to understand these things about people within their team, and rather than being reactive to mental health issues, we can start being proactive and addressing these things, so that we can monitor if the physical side or the social side is starting to drop off for that individual, and we can intervene before it becomes an issue that means that they aren't being effective in work, they aren't getting signed off, they're not relapsing. By doing that, we can ensure that that person is working at a higher performance than they typically would be. So immediately that 40% of people working to high performance increases by managing people in this way, building it into reviews, building it into different ways in which your managers work. It remains, it keeps that focus, not just in the day-to-day, but whether it's on a particular project, whether it's on different things that are coming up. So, for example, if you have a real busy period coming up at work, you know that some businesses we work with, for example, are utility, civil engineering businesses. So they work within the water industry, and towards Christmas, the winter, their staff get really, really busy. So we've been working with them throughout the beginning of this year, so they can start understanding within all of their teams what keeps their people well, in anticipation of it becoming a really busy period. You can then start monitoring people, or kind of just being aware of what keeps them well. And throughout that really, really busy time, you're able to start addressing these things and making sure that throughout that busy period where your people are so important to be on point, to be performing, that you can monitor and make sure that they are. It also solidifies relationships. So the success of this that we've seen by managers or by encouraging managers to have this level of interest in their staff. And again, it's not necessarily getting into really personal things. It's not necessarily getting into any clinical things. So it's well within the boundaries of management. It really solidifies the relationship between manager and employee. So we've seen loyalty massively increase within our clients by managers dealing with their team in this way. It also helps the manager from a management perspective, being able to recognize these things early and having those trigger points in the back of their mind about where and when their team may be slipping. So often we can see these signs of someone being slightly off, and we can see these signs of someone struggling to be effective, but knowing what to do and what sort of stuff to focus on has been quite an issue. So by stepping in and the manager being able to then put those adjustments in place at work and ensuring that that person can start working in a healthier way, or just helping have that focus back on the things that keep them well, can really improve loyalty. It also has a massive impact on resilience. There's a huge amount about resilience out there, and I understand that resilience is incredibly important. But one of the things that I will say is that no matter how resilient someone is, if they have a condition or if they have something situational go on, everybody has their limits. And by keeping as well as possible, then our resilience is maintained. Our resilience is able to be boosted naturally by working in this way. We're only as resilient as we are well. And I think that you can be incredibly, if you feel on top of things, if you feel that you are working in a way that is healthy, you're naturally going to be more resilient because you have those natural endorphins, hormones that are in balance within your body. So it naturally improves resilience by just working in this way. And then the obvious side of reducing absence and churn, looking at the way that this has worked within some of our clients. In April, there was somebody who had a condition in one of our clients, and the manager was able to deal with it in this way, and we reduced their time off by around about 75%. So by looking at historically what that person has come up against, by focusing on these things and building them into the way that the manager supported that person and built into their day these different things that could keep them well, that's the sort of impact that it can have. 75% reduction in time off with that person. So it's just something to consider, and hopefully this is helping you to think about what sort of initiatives, whether it's training initiatives, whether it's things that are going to support your staff, or if you already have things in place and you're considering how well they're working in the long term, then hopefully this is helping to allow you to do that. So when can this sort of thing be used? So there are some everyday uses which I would really encourage you to have a look at. It could be within your recruitment process. So it could be that you are you start building in asking these questions at interview, for example. So not necessarily do you have a mental health condition, because obviously it's everyone that hopefully we employ adults, and everyone who is an adult is allowed, it's got perfect freedom to be able to disclose what they want to you, but asking what sort of enjoyable activities they do, what fits in to maintain their physical health, what sorts of things socially do they do, but then actually build that into how you manage that person, and ensuring that you're able to then monitor what they're keeping up with. If that starts dropping off, you will see an impact in their work. That's how this biopsychosocial model works, and this is how clinicians can do it. So if you can build that into the way that you're managing new recruits, graduates, and understanding that from the initial process of recruiting people, but actually recording it and then being able to manage them off of that, you will be able to build that in every day into the culture of your business and how you manage people, so in just general management practices. So you can just help managers understand their people a little bit better when they're new recruits coming through, and how you can start monitoring somebody if they are starting to dip in mood or anything like that. And naturally, by having that built into your business to use every day, it's something that can change the culture of the business, help it be a lot more positive, a lot more open, and you will start seeing that these conversations develop into much more open conversation, and that's where that strength of relationship and loyalty lies within your people. Then you can have a particular focus on it. So everyday uses would be more around just having an understanding of your team in that way, understanding when they might be dipping, that sort of thing. But to have if you wanted to just address it on quite a specific basis with certain people, then you can start building this into your return to work processes, so that rather than understanding what led them to being signed off, understanding what started dropping off and what effect that had in their personal lives from a physical health standpoint, exercise, that sort of thing, through to different things like the social elements. You can start looking at your initiatives slightly differently. So if they're unwell, for example, they might be able to keep up with their exercise. It might be something that they're so passionate about, they're so keen on, that will never drop off for them. It might be that the social side is something that is really difficult. So for that team and that area of the business or division, then social initiatives is what is going to make the most impact. So you can start angling the initiatives within your business appropriately. If someone discloses a diagnosis, it can also be really impactful to understand this particular area and how to manage that illness, understanding it from their perspective. Everyone's completely individual. Different things matter to different people. Some people don't care about exercise whatsoever, but it can be something that's really important to build into their day. So even if it's suggesting walking meetings, they can be have a massive benefit, not necessarily just to the meeting and how effective it is, but to that person's well-being. So it might be that you can build in a process with that manager encourages a walking meeting 2-3 times a week, for example, just so that you can keep on top of that illness and make sure that you're able to monitor it. And then, like I said before, with some of our clients, after they've been able to go through the business, build up these different ideas and understanding of how their teams operate, you can then start having a more specific, isolated focus on these things within your team during these busy periods, during those periods of a product launch or a new project, or even if you know that you're coming up to a point where it's going to be a difficult time for the business. There might be a management buyout, there might be a change in ownership, or there could even be redundancies. So having a specific focus on these sorts of things will ensure that those people are still remaining active at work and being focused at work, to drive up that loss of productivity, to drive up that risk of it dipping back to 40% people who are high performing. So by ensuring that you're monitoring this and managing this and putting it in before stressful periods, putting it in before these different issues come up, can ensure that you're keeping your people effective, active and focused within work a lot more than if nothing was being done. So this is how we do it. So from an Arthur Ellis perspective, we train mentors within businesses. So actually with the tools and the different guidance on how to do this within your team. So we train mentors within businesses to do this, which is typically management teams, to sit down with their team, understand this, how to gain insight, so the practicalities around that, the different soft skills. So that training sort of takes half a day. So we've been trying to keep it as as short as possible. Really, it's a hell of a 4 hours, but we want to make sure that it is as efficient as possible. Employee training, we do a variety of different emotional intelligence training with employees. So we don't necessarily just put up bullet points of different illnesses, like for example with anxiety. We take the most prominent symptoms and we do different interactive fun exercises around around those symptoms, whether it is an experience or like a visual thing that helps them understand actually what that symptom means and start being able to recognize it, or whether it's getting everybody up, doing star jumps, doing different things so that we can start seeing the physical impacts that these symptoms can have. By doing it this way, it's been part and parcel of some of the awards that we've won, primarily because we're able to increase emotional intelligence by up to around 93%, which is about 20% more effective in helping people understand these things and being able to act on these things than our competitors. So we've been able to be really successful in that. And we've also launched a one-to-one service. So for that clinical piece that we don't want managers to be doing, that behavioural change side and that understanding your condition side, we now have been able to bring in people who are trained in psychology, who are mental health practitioners, to be able to support employees who may have more complex conditions, things in which we can start actively supporting. We also have a digital health platform, so understanding these different things within your team can be a little bit difficult to track. So especially if the management of an individual changes, how do you kind of hand over what that person needs to build into the way that you manage them? So we've built a digital platform which has video coaching around each step of the process for managers, video coaching about reaching out to employees, and then a storage system and different clinical templates that support employees to make sure that their GP appointment is going to be effective, that if they're going up to psychology or if they've got an appointment with a counsellor, then they know what to expect from that appointment and they can think about it beforehand just to make sure it's as effective as possible. We've also been lucky enough to be able to start up a non-profit arm of the business. So we've had quite a lot of different public organisations, charities asking for our training so that they can support their communities a little bit better or a little bit more effectively. So we have set up a non-profit to support other non-profits, support different community organisations, and we offer student and teacher training within schools, and all of that is to help pay for a one-to-one support system for children and young people. So a lot of the time children go to try and access some support, or parents try and access some support for their children, and unfortunately the thresholds are very, very high because of the different issues that we mentioned earlier in terms of access and funding. So we've developed a one-to-one support system for children where they get one-to-one with a therapist or a mental health worker to help tackle the issues that they're facing, whether it's tackling issues alone or helping them and their parent communicate a little bit better. So the work that we do with businesses, the work that we do with different non-profits can really help to support that side of what we do as well. So this is the point where I am going to head into questions. If you would like to put down in there any questions that you may have, really keen to see what questions you may have, whether it's about anything that I've said, whether it's about anything that you're looking at within your business, or even any initiatives that you currently have in place. So if you pop down your questions in the questions tab, I will address those, have a look at them as and when I get them through. So we have one here. Is there another route to use for support apart from the GP? Absolutely. So So if you are looking to go and access some therapeutic support, if you Google, I'm not sure what sort of locations the attendees are, but you can Google your local self-referral unit. There are a variety of different mental health trusts, so it's difficult to say what service is going to be right for your location. But rather than going to your GP, quite a lot of the time, in most areas of the country now, there is a self-referral unit locally in your trust or in your mental health service. So basically, that is just an online form that you can fill out with what you might be experiencing, what you have been sort of going through, and what's been leading up to it. And then they can receive that through, give you a call, and set up an assessment. Like I said, it might take some time, but rather than going straight to the GP, what you can do is guide your people towards these sorts of resources. So hopefully that helps. What else do we have? What kind of mental health first aid training would you suggest? So there is, so mental health first aid, I've done it. I actually think that it is really good, and it's really good for that very, very initial, that initial approach to somebody. So mental health first aid particularly covers a process. So it's called ALGEE, ALGEE, which is approach, listen, gain insight, encourage them to help themselves, and encourage them to encourage them to get some professional support. So it's very much around that signposting piece and being able to suggest that they go and seek some help. So mental health first aid is really good to have that initial conversation. One thing that we've had from different businesses is that after that process, how do we then manage people? And quite a lot of businesses have sort of recognised that they've been able to make that approach and address that issue and encourage them to get help. But then what can we do as a business to support it? So it's certainly worthwhile getting or having a look at mental health first aid. But again, it's looking at making sure that it's going to work long term and it's going to have an impact when those people come back and when they're working day to day. Also, mental health first aid have a train the trainer model, which essentially anybody can go in and become a mental health first aid trainer. So what I would say is, if you are looking at mental health first aid, is to ensure that you're going to a reputable business to do it. Not to say that there's a bunch of cowboys going on and everything, but just to ensure that you're going direct to Mental Health First Aid England, or for example, I did mine through St John's Ambulance. So just going to a reputable business is something that I would just make sure that you're doing. What is the business case for having first aiders? So I can convince my line manager. Oh, I can't see the bottom of that question. So there'd be something to pursue. Okay, so what is the business case for having first aiders? So I can convince my line manager that it would be something to pursue. So if I can just go back to having a look at these different figures, these are things that you can make note of, and this is across all businesses. So if you're looking at implementing any mental health training at all, these are the sort of stats that it can start to impact. From a commercial point of view, which most leaders, which most people in senior positions are kind of focused on, if you're having a look at these commercial impacts and that £1,304 per employee, across the business, not to do with whether they have a condition or not. That is what mental health is costing you. So if you're looking at building a business case as to why you need to have something in place for people, then this is a really good place to start, and start building up a way that you can monitor whether managers are actually having an impact, whether that initiative is having an impact. So if you are looking to sort of convince a line manager, I would start with these figures, start with this fact, and have a look at what that means for your business, and then help them understand that this is the sort of commercial impact it's having on us without having anything in place. And then what you can start to do is have a look on whether first aid would be a worthwhile investment, whether it's going to be long-term enough, how many that you may need, because there are a couple of businesses that we work with who have some in place. And for example, one business we work with has about, I think it's 5,300 employees within a particular division. They've got 16 mental health first aiders. So what I would suggest is, if you are going to go and do something and you're building a business case for something, ensure that there's going to be enough support for your people and the ratio is right, because it's one thing having first aiders in place, but having them so they're going to be effective and actually start tackling these issues, rather than them just wearing a different lanyard or wearing a badge or something. I would say, if you're going to invest in something, invest properly, so that it starts tackling these figures rather than just doing it to tick a box or anything like that. Because if you're building a business case and you're demonstrating that these figures are having an impact on your company, you need to ensure that the investment is going to be enough to actually start making a difference to these figures, rather than it just being something that's nice to have in the company. And then you can start addressing what sort of training is going to be the right training. If it's mental health first aid, what impact is that going to have long term? And what sort of impact is it going to have to these figures? Hopefully that helped. We've got another question here. How can I spot if a colleague is experiencing mental health issues? So this is something that we do within our employee training, in our emotional intelligence training. And what I would suggest, if you know that employee quite well, you will notice a variety of different character changes, whether that is they become slightly more emotional than usual, they might be increasingly tired, maybe I call it scatty. I don't know whether that's the proper term, but when they become very, very busy but ineffective, if that makes sense. That can also be something else, that there's just so much going on in their mind that they're unable to cope with simple day-to-day tasks. You can also bear in mind that physical and social side. So typically, if people are experiencing mental health issues, the social side will begin to be affected. So they may begin to isolate themselves. They may have less stories after the weekend of what they've been up to. They might not be replying to certain things. And then from the physical aspect, and that's why understanding that model is really important. From the physical aspect, they may become just less active in general, less motivated to be active. So they might just sit at their desk all day, if that is their kind of role. If they have more of an active role, and so for example, in some of our clients, with the guys who work on in the utilities, they have a very, very active job. So they might just become more sluggish within their work, or they might become a little bit more demotivated towards their work. So there's a couple of ways that you can start spotting it, and how to then address that is to sit them down and just be able to discuss your concerns with them. Say what you noticed. It's absolutely okay to you can talk to them about what you've noticed, that they've become a little bit more sluggish, that they have been struggling to concentrate, and just asking and exploring why they think that is, what's been going on with them. So hopefully that helps with that one. Are there any proposals or plans for mental health initiatives from the government or other, I think that says lobbies, but it's not letting me see it. There are. So from a mental health standpoint, there has been quite a lot of investment that has been outlined into the services. So it's actually been outlined that there's been around 20 billion that will be put into the mental health services. I am personally sceptical of that. It was similar was said around 5 years ago, and before then, similar was said again, where there has been a lot of money put aside from the government or from different lobbyists to inject into the services. Unfortunately, all of that is very dependent on who runs the government, and at the moment, the people who are currently in the running for it, I think that they don't necessarily have that on their agenda. So what we've seen before is that there has been some funding safeguarded, and then there's a change in leadership, and then with the change in leadership becomes a change in focus, and that money is put elsewhere. So Jeremy Hunt, for example, will reallocate that money or put the money more into armed forces, which I completely agree with as well. But it just shows how dependent it is on the next few months and year, really. And you've put down there as well that you have 280 employees. So the cost to employer for your particular business is 3,655,120. So that's really helpful. Thank you for putting that down there. I appreciate we're running out of time. What is the first step for any organisation can take to make a healthier workplace? The very, very first step, if you're not looking at investing too much and all of that sort of stuff, get some plants. It probably sounds really strange, but if I can imagine that people, or there's certain businesses that have 2-hour meetings, if you look at the carbon dioxide levels within your body, if you're sat in a room without any circulating air, without any plants that are helping to circulate air and release good air into the room, then after 2 hours of being in that room, your carbon dioxide levels in your body are at a point that you should not be making decisions medically. You should not be making decisions after 2 hours in a room. So what I would say in any first step is to just start encouraging people to get out, have those walking meetings, get some plants in the office, have regular circulating air, start providing water or encouraging people to drink more water. So whether that's right for your business, I'm not too sure, but that is one thing that I would certainly encourage. Can we use internal communications to help? Oh, sorry, I can't quite see that question. Can we use internal communications, intranet, email, etc., to help managers, colleagues maintain their mental health, reduce the stigma, talking about mental health? Yes, you can. Obviously, it needs to be done in a way that is respectful and has and doesn't isolate anybody. So it needs to be more general. But certainly, if you wanted to put different general statements out there, not referring to anyone in particular. So you, in relation to internal comms, you need to be quite careful on what you put out there so it doesn't isolate anyone or make any suggestions towards anybody. For example, if something has just happened with an employee and there's a lot of hearsay around the office, to put something out about it, not necessarily about them, but about it in general, may be quite obvious to them that it's about them. So I think that certainly putting out general stats, general figures, general things that you can share around the office to encourage people to talk about it more can be only a good thing, as long as you just sort of bear in mind that confidential aspect. I've got another one here as well. Last one. We have someone who has self-diagnosed autism. Would you suggest sending them to a GP to have this diagnosed, or accept their self-diagnosis to avoid the problems you've mentioned with GP referrals? So autism is slightly different. GPs don't necessarily diagnose it, so they would need to go to a specialist doctor. I would self-diagnosis is not something that is encouraged. So certainly I would have a look at encouraging them to go and seek professional help with that. That's not something really that you can't really self-diagnose. I've sort of had a few people in our one-to-one side who've got self-diagnosed bipolar, and you can't. Self-diagnosis is essentially looking online and having a relationship with the symptoms that you've seen. You're not getting that input from a clinical professional for a diagnosis, and then that's what you need. So I would encourage them to either go to support groups around autism to understand a bit more about it, but definitely go to their GP and get a referral for it. I appreciate that it will take some time in self-diagnosis, but yeah, self-diagnosis won't be something that you can really work off. You need a proper diagnosis of these things, because it could be a variety of other things. It might not necessarily be autism, and without that clinical knowledge, and we can't diagnose that ourselves personally. So they need to have professional input on that. Hopefully that helps. Okay, so slightly over because of all the questions, but I really appreciate all the questions. Thanks so much for those. I believe that this is going to get shared out there. So it's been recorded, and you can revisit any aspects that you might want to have a look at. As well, if you would like to follow us and all of that sort of stuff, I'd really appreciate it. We've just released a new website, so it's very exciting. So if you wanted any more information about us, please feel free. And I'm sure that my details and stuff will be circulated afterwards. But if you have a look at Arthur Ellis Mental Health Support, you can find us. And if anyone's got any questions following that, I'm on LinkedIn as Jon Manning. So please feel free to find me, pop any questions that you may have, and if you want to talk about anything else, then I am here. Thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate your time, and have wonderful days.